intimately aware of this. That year-long process was filled with all kinds of difficulties and challenges that I don't think any of us could have foreseen. Ultimately, the county did, in fact, approve the $250,000, and as a consequence, the ACUTE now is ready to make their commitment of $750,000, and my understanding is possibly more. Another $260,000 is being discussed. So the good news, on top of the good news, is that while there may have been a shortfall in getting to the $1.253 million total amount, that shortfall appears to be in hand now, and we may be able to talk today about a project that's fully funded and ready for implementation. So with that, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank all of you that have been involved in this process, not only in the past year, but long before that. And I want to thank particularly DEQ and Antrim County for their generous contribution of funds that make this project possible. So with that, unless there's any comments or questions, I think I'll turn it over to Janice and Scott, and they'll talk a little bit about where we're at with the investigation.
Janice, where are we?
Yeah, it depends on which area you're at. So, do you know where you want to?
Just general speaking, you have to consider general that.
Yeah, where does it start? It starts at about.
It ranges at like Shush Mountain in front of the mountain. The depth of water maybe 10, 15 feet below grade, but up on Del Mason Road, which is that's north of Plume Road, depth of water is like 260 feet. So it really varies with the topography.
Even though we all consider that the shallow.
And then the aquifers, there's about 300 to 320 feet thickness of water-bearing sands that residential wells are extremely different.
Is there any other questions right now? Because we can't hear back there when you're talking up here.
Well, we're getting real loud with our questions.
There we go.
Okay, well, this is a map of the Five Corners area. We do sample some homes that are not in Five Corners. I just couldn't find a map, so I used what I had. So on the map, the ones in orange are homes that have tested positive and have either been connected to MASA or are under contract to connect. And then the dot in red is the most recent home that was found to be positive, actually from the May 22nd sampling date. And I've worked with the homeowners. They're on vacation this week, but we'll be back next week so that I can collect a second repeat sample. So this kind of shows you can see it's moving, and Janice was talking about Alpenhaus, and that is the orange star in the top left corner.
There was one more Coyote Pass.
Yeah.
That we've gotten some intermittent results where we get a clean sample and then a positive. Are they getting hooked up?
Yeah, that whole area along Shane Creek Road to Duskin is getting hooked up.
At what level, parts per million, would you consider tagging that exceeds what?
Actually, what we're doing, our drinking water number is 5 parts per billion, but our drinking water number is 5 parts per billion, but what we're doing, as soon as we have anything that's above 0, we're immediately placing people on monitored drinking water, bottled water, and then working to either being able to hook them up or standing the MASA to them.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
As I'm sitting here, it occurs to me that I look around and I see a lot of faces that may not have been involved at the beginning. So please speak up. I mean, we're kind of into a technical description of what's going on. And if you don't have a historical context, please ask questions. There are no dumb questions when it comes to this issue. Yes, sir.
There's no cure for this, what you're saying. There's nothing you can do besides offer people water from an uncontaminated well.
The short answer is no. The long answer is we continue to look at that issue. We're going to talk about it today again. Remediation of TCE in groundwater. We're talking about 13 trillion gallons of water, 6.5 mile long plume that's 1.5 miles long at the leading edge. All of the experts that we've had engaged in trying to find an answer to that question have told us to try to do something with that magnitude of water and geography is just almost an impossible task. Where there have been successes, they have been in small concentrated areas, maybe the size of this room or the footprint of this building, where nanoscale iron technology, bugs that go down and eat this stuff, have been used successfully. So there is the possibility that we might be able to do something on an experimental basis in some of these red hotspots that you see. But that remains to be seen. In order to do that, we've got to have some help from DEQ, so even more help, another $5,000 or so to do some bench scale testing and to identify with us those hotspots and to see whether or not something on an experimental basis that would have some, that might offer some help to similar communities around the country as a model, if you will, if that might be possible. There's also been some discussion of trying to use nanoscale iron or some remediation to mitigate the impact on the Cedar River well field. But as you can see, the focus now in the short term and even in the next 5 to 7 years is on making certain that people are getting safe drinking water. But we're not going to give up. We've never given up on the idea of remediation. We'll continue to fight that kind of uphill battle.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a geographical line at which you start bringing people online from Bel Air's water supply instead of Mancelona's water supply?
You know, that's another great question. One of the benefits that I think ACUTE has brought to Antrim County and engaging all of us as community members and governmental officials is to keep that, open that door and keep that dialogue going. Is there a geographic line? No, not specifically, but at some point, the TCE, Plume, and nature is going to dictate things that governmental officials may or may not be at the point of being able to address in the short term. So at some point, once infrastructure extends that far, there's also some practical engineering things that come into play. There's more than just the Bel Air system. We've got the Water system, which is a privately owned system. So there are systems that may be impacted by this, or there may be engineering that says, common sense that says, you're close enough now that instead of bringing the water from all the way to Mancelona or the Cedar River well field, it makes more sense to connect the system up to the Bel Air system. So I can't give you a specific answer on that, but I hope that the local governmental officials will continue to stay at the table as this Plume continues to move, because at some point that dialogue may really be critical. Somebody else?
So does it dissolve in water and move through the water?
Yes, and TCE is a sinker, meaning that it'll find its lowest point.
Does it dissolve?
Yes.
Does it go away when it hits the air?
It goes away when it hits the air. So when it hits the Cedar River, for example, once TCE hits the air, it dissipates. One of the things that started this whole process was that Dura at the time was recommending a pump-to-treat system at the leading edge of the Plume, which does exactly what you're talking about. It's a tower that takes groundwater, puts it into the air, and pumps it back into the aquifer. That was about $1.5 million proposal, and DEQ in its wisdom, and I agreed with them at the time, and still do, said it's just, you know, when you're talking about 1.5 miles long, you're talking about a picket fence of pump-to-treat systems, and the cost of pumping that much water was just prohibitive. So we ended up instead creating the Mancelona Water and Sewer Authority and providing a regional water system through that municipality. So it you know, long answer to a short question, but it does dissipate when it hits the air, yes.
So there isn't really any threat in polluting the lakes, the rivers. Once it gets to that area, it precipitate in the...
That's right. The concentrations that we're talking about, I get asked this question a lot. What happens when it hits Lake Bel Air? Probably nothing. I mean, the small concentrations that we're talking about on a body of water that big would be non-detected. I mean, if that's, anybody disagree? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Has anyone tried to secure federal funding to help with the costs?
There's two plumes here. So we've got the Tar Lake plume, which is about a half mile south of the Dura site, which this plume originates on the Dura site, Tar Lake is about a half mile south on US 131. The Dura site was an EPA Superfund site. This site, because the DEQ did an extensive investigation on ownership, could not find a potential responsible party, ended up being a DEQ lead project. So for this specific issue, the TCE Plume, DEQ took the lead, DEQ has provided all the funding. They work very cooperatively with EPA, but this is not an EPA lead project, unlike the Tar Lake.
It's not eligible for any federal funding. That's I'm not sure how it works, but.
No. There's a longer answer, but that's the short answer.
Just in response to the question about the Bel Air, City of Bel Air system, I did speak to David Schultz, and I think that his feeling is that the City of Bel Air system would need some major improvements in order to be extended fairly far beyond its current reaches, but they are interested in possibly doing it.
They've been very, very proactively involved in this issue, for certain. Okay, any other questions? Okay, Joe Elliott's up next. Gordy Frazier, and Joe's the CEO of Gordy Frazier. Gordy Frazier Engineering has been involved with the Mancelona Area Water and Sewer Authority since the very beginning of this. Has been tremendously helpful in creating a regional municipal water system. And Joe's going to talk a little bit about the specifics, the meat and potatoes of this project, the timeline, the project itself, and what its intended outcomes are. I'm going to hand you the next one.
About 2000, when the authority first was formed, and they were taking on this TCE issue with the expansion of the Mancelona system and connection to the Cedar River system and purchase of the Cedar River system and all that stuff that went on in the past. So I'm kind of the history guy in the system, and the guy that knows more history than me is Jim McCordy. He's the administrator for MASA, and Jim has been the administrator there for I don't know how many years, quite a while now, and operator also. Administrator operator, and then he was previously working for Cedar River prior to that, so he has a great history on the whole system. So Jim was the guy to turn to if you're looking for history, especially Cedar River system. Then also here today is Jennifer Hodges. She's in the back room back there. She's engineer with us, and she works hand in hand with Jim on a lot of the technical issues when it gets to looking at the water study and running the models and booster stations and PRVs and all the technical aspects of the project. Look to Jennifer for that. So I'm going to try to go through it real quick. The purpose of the project, as Gary said, was really to try to be proactive and be prepared for what's coming at you. There was a lot of concern. There's a lot of good work that had been done the last 10 or 12 years with the system, but there were still a lot of questions, especially to a lot of the property owners. When's it going to get to my property? How am I going to keep safe drinking water? What are you planning for the future? So we started back in 2012. The DEQ appropriated some funds to really take a proactive look at the future for the next 20 years of the area and how the Plume's moving and how safe drinking water could be provided to all the folks that are going to be impacted. So they appropriated $300,000 originally. That was to look at some options. It was also to put in a bunch of test wells at some of the locations. We were hoping to locate a new water source to move the Cedar River wells. And so we went through about a year and a half on that, had some meetings in March and July of 2013, and we selected what we call as option 3, which was to not locate wells up on this end of the system in the path of the Plume or potential path of the Plume, because there was some concern. We kept looking to AMAC and Steve, and the DEQ was saying, where can we stick a well, and we're 100% guaranteed that it's not going to be impacted. And that was a tough question to answer on there, because you don't know. You think you're 95% sure, but you're not 100% sure. So that's why we settled in on option 3. Currently, the Mancelona water system has 4 wells over on the Mancelona side of the system. And this is a picture of the overall. This area in here is Mancelona. Step away so you can see. So Mancelona is here. Shush Mountain, Cedar River is right in here. Shush Mountain Tank's right up here, we're right there. Shanty Creek's over in this area. So what we looked at originally was to locate some wells possibly north of the Cedar River over here. And we threw that out because we couldn't be 100% sure. So we went back to getting our water supply from down in this area, upgrading into the Plume. So that's, Plume starts in Mancelona and heads to the northwest, and we're going to be to the southeast of there. And it's a strong aquifer, and we feel we can put wells in that area. Right now, Jim and Massa has 4 wells in that area. We just put down a new one about 2 years ago. We did some pretty extensive pumping on that and found that it's not going to draw that flow back. It's a strong aquifer, and where we have the wells set, that's a safe drinking water location. So we're going to supply the water from Mancelona and send it to the northwest. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So we did, as Gary said, we went to the DEQ back in 2013-14, had an overall project of $5.7 million that kind of solved the whole issue. That money wasn't available, so we backed that down to what do we really need to do right now to answer the questions that you property owners have, that if the Plume moves and my well's impacted, can you give me safe drinking water? And I think the solution we came up with answers that question. This is the service areas in the Shush Mountain area. Currently, Jim supplies water to his water system through the Cedar River wells. They pretty much pump the water on the ground, send it to the Shush Mountain users, the Cedar River users, the Hawkseye users. That's where they're getting the water from, is the Cedar River wells. You're coming down M88 where the visitor center used to be. From there back to Mancelona, all those folks are getting their water from the Mancelona wells currently. So the big change we're going to do is that line between the Mancelona water users and the Cedar River well water users. We're going to slide that to the northwest, and we're going to supply more water out of the Mancelona wells and less water out of the Cedar River wells. So this kind of shows the general service areas. We got the Shush Tank service area. The Shush Tank is up on top of Shush Mountain. The booster station service area, and then a new tank future service area, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that extends, as Janice showed you, to the northwest as that Plume keeps going that direction. So here again, we're kind of showing the service districts. The lighter colored area is a low pressure service district that can be served off the level of the tank in Mancelona. So just gravity off that tank will send you water to your house at 40 or 50 pounds to come out of your faucet. The darker area, that's what we call a higher pressure service area, and we have to jack up the pressure to get you adequate pressure. Right now, the Cedar River wells have the wells that go into the pneumatic tank, and they provide adequate pressure for those users up there. And so we're going to match that pressure that you currently have right now.
Before you move on, I have a question.
Yes.
So those Cedar River wells are directly in the line of the...
Yes, pretty much.
Okay, so you're going to reduce the amount of water being pulled out of those wells, but you're not going to completely eliminate it?
Well, we're going to reduce it initially because the wells pull from a very deep aquifer down about 600 feet if you're up on the far end of Truman Drive where those wells are. And that Plume, as Steve says, is about 250 as it's passing through that area. So we're about 300 foot deeper than where the Plume is.
So 250 is the deepest you have impact?
Well, Steve can get more into that. There's a shallow impact, and then there's also a deeper Plume that is back quite a ways. So we have more time before that gets there. So the question we're trying to answer is, can we slow down the Cedar River wells to possibly protect that asset? Because you have a big investment up there, and continue to pump that water and let that Plume not impact that. And if for some reason the Plume does impact those wells, we have a plan for supplying water without those wells. If that answers your question. So we'll go to the next slide here. So the two things we're proposing in 2015-16 to try to get implemented with the funding is, first of all, would be put a water storage tank up at the Cedar River well site. And the reason we're doing that is because with water storage, you don't have to pump your wells as hard. So if you have a demand on your system, higher demand or a large demand by the users. Right now, those wells have to kick in and send the water, because there's no reservoir waiting there, other than the groundwater itself. So by building a water tank, we're providing a reservoir so we can slow pump those wells and fill it in low demand hours, and then when the high demand hours come, we can send the water out of the tank and still just keep slow pumping our wells. So that's the reason for the 300,000 gallon storage tank. We are going to put a booster station with that to get that pressure up in that darker yellow area, so we can provide the same pressure you're seeing now. So from a user standpoint, you won't see a lot of difference. You'll see about the same pressure. You will have better fire protection up in that area for now. And the other thing the 300,000 gallon tank does is it really sets up for the future as that plume moves to the northwest. That's going to supply that water storage and that water supply for those people that are impacted as that plume continues to move.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm hearing that there's nothing stopping you from migrating. There's no remediation at all going on right now?
No,
No plans for future
No.
maintenance? So it's not the leading edge moving?
no, it's not.
So the first part of the project is a 300,000 gallon storage tank and a booster station. That's right up on Truon Drive, just as you come off Shannon Creek Road. That's where the wells are, so that's where that'll be built. It'll be an in-ground tank, so once it's constructed, you'll see the construction going on, but once it's constructed, you really won't look any different than it is right now when you drive by there, because it'll be an in-ground tank. And we'll build that in a 3-cell type of format. It's 150,000 gallons a cell. We're hoping to build 2 cells now, and then it's set up so you just add another cell as you have more demand in the future. The other part of the project that we're looking for in 2015-16 is providing a water supply to this area if the Cedar River wells do become impacted. So right now, water comes from this area, from Mancelona, and we have a main that runs on up into Shish Mountain. So we're going to utilize this main right here and turn it into a high pressure main. Right now it has a pressure reducing valve right about here. And so this will be a high pressure main. And then right at the entrance to the Shish Mountain Lodge, we're going to run a new 12-inch line that's going to go towards the lodge, up the hill on the left side of the ski area, and up to the tank on top. And what that will do is it will supply an alternate water source for all those users up in the Shish Mountain area. The Cedar River users, the Hawkseye users, the Five Corners users. So now we have to be served from Cedar River wells because we don't have that connection. In the future, you'll be able to pull your supply out of that new connection. So that answers the second part of the question, which is if the Cedar River wells do become impacted, can I get water? And the answer is yes. So we're putting in this high pressure loop, and as I said, it goes up through the ski area, ties into the tank. We're also going to build a booster station up on top of the tank, a small booster station that'll provide water to this higher service area. And the reason we're doing that is right now we have the booster station over here to serve that higher area, but if the Cedar River wells become impacted, we wouldn't be able to serve that high pressure area. So we're going to have a small booster station there so we can send water that way. So there again, that answers the question of if my well becomes contaminated, will I have safe drinking water in the well? So.
How often are those Cedar River wells sampled? and tested?
Jim?
For TCE right now, we're only required to sample every 3 years. We sampled it last year. We're on our own, we're going to sample it every year. They have a lot of monitor wells between that well field and the Plume right now, which Janice was talking about earlier, and basically called sentry wells, and they'll detect the TCE before it gets to that well field. I believe, Janice, are those sentry wells sampled once a year?
Yes, they are. So twice a year, I'm sorry, twice a year.
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
So the 2 parts of the project that we've been working on the design in is the storage tank booster station and the high pressure loop, and then some pressure reducing stations and a small booster station. As Janice mentioned, a couple other parts of the puzzle are the dusk and drive water main, which is just an extension of the current water main out to wells that are being impacted, and then the Elbenhaus. And those projects are just getting going as far as design goes, but we hope to incorporate Duskin and Elbenhaus and this loop all as one project because we feel we'll get better pricing that way. So we'll probably put that out as one project, and that'll all, we'll talk about schedule a little bit later. So this is an engineer schematic. I like it, but everybody else is probably confused. What I'm trying to show is just the things we were talking about with the pressure zones. These are the Cedar River wells here. These are the Mancelona wells. Right now, our two parts of our project is this 300,000 gallon storage tank. Once we build that, we're going to have that in the booster station here. We're going to pull water out of the Cedar River wells as long as it's safe drinking water and send it out to the system, to this pressure zone 3, which is the high pressure zone. And then over on this side, we have the existing shush tank here. The battery's running out, I think. And then we're going to tie into the Mancelona water system and run this loop and tie into the shush tank, put in a small booster station that'll feed this pressure zone 3. So you'll have service from 2 different directions there, which is what an operator wants because you want reliability to serve your customer if you have a problem. So that's the schematic, and I got a board back there. If anybody wants to talk more about that, I'll talk more about that later. Next 12 months, as I said, right now, the high pressure loop, the Cedar River tank, we've been working on the design of that, and we're wrapping that up here shortly. The Duskin Elbenhaus water main extensions will be designed here in the next month or so. And we just got done completing the water model. If you have any questions on that, talk to Jennifer, not me. And as I said, the original appropriation of $300,000 is, by the time we get through all this design work and the previous study work and some of the other stuff, that'll be pretty much spent. And I think June 30th is the date on that. I think actually next Tuesday we have to be done with what we're doing. So, as I said, right now design's completed, including cost estimates for the storage tank, the water main looping, and the Elbenhaus. Secure the funding. It sounds like that's been done. So now we can go to implementation. This is just a picture, aerial view of where that water main loop is going to go from. This is Shush Mountain Road. This is the entrance to Shush Mountain Lodge. So we're going to bring it down that, up the hill, and tie into the water tank right up in this area. There's an existing water main that runs right in that location already, but that actually serves this lower area, so we can't tie the high pressure main into that. So we're running a separate main ups for that. So that's physically what we're looking at for one project. This is the other project up on Truon Drive. As I said, here's Truon right here as you come in, and it's going to be built right here. Those will be in-ground tanks. Each cell is about 25 feet by 75 feet by 15 feet, but it'll be below grade for the most part. Unless you're standing over here in front, you really won't see it. But as a drive-by, you won't see the tank if you drive by. You have to get into the site to actually see it. We're trying to be sensitive to the aesthetics of everything. Cost estimates. The high pressure loop part is about 550 grand. That includes the PRB and the booster station. And then the Cedar River well tank. We're designing that, as I said, as a 450,000 gallon tank with 3 cells. We're going to bid it as a 300,000 gallon tank. We hope it comes in at around 711,000. We feel that number is still pretty accurate. Until we bid it, we don't know. If it comes in too high, we either have to get more funding, or we may have to back it down to 150,000 gallon cell, which is adequate for short term. But as you need to provide more storage for Shanty Creek and some of those users, we would have to add another cell at that time. So 300,000 gallon tank is really, according to the water study, what we want right now. If we're not going to be able to afford it, I think we can move the project forward at 150. With the blessing of the DEQ, of course. And Duskin Drive is about 273, and Elbenhaus is about 100 grand for that extension, and those are really kind of separate funding projects from the 1.2. Schedule, we've got the designs pretty well done on 2 of the components. We're going to wrap up Duskin and Elbenhaus next month. So we'll be into permitting in July and August. We would like to bid it in kind of August through September potentially. And ideally, we'd like to get to a schedule that allows a contractor to start this fall if he wants to, but he can wait till spring if he wants to, because you get better pricing that way. So it's probably going to be a project that stretches into about this time next year, would be my guess. Gives the guys some flexibility and schedule his crews easier, and typically get better pricing. So I think we have the time to do that, so we would recommend that would be the schedule on it. After July of next year, we're going to continue to use Cedar River wells at slow control pumping. Janice and Steve will continue to monitoring the Plume movement. And if it requires future extensions, it will require future extensions. And that's what's been happening to date. And then continue to monitor the Sentinel wells. And one of two outcomes. One would be they do detect TCE. Then we use that new high pressure loop to serve water to all users. And we'd abandon the Cedar River well field. And as long as we don't detect TCE, we'll just continue to monitor the Plume and continue using the Cedar River wells, because it's an asset that you all invested in and you might as well use it rather than abandon it. So that's kind of the end of my discussion, Gary. Hope it didn't take too long.
Let's open up to questions.
Yeah, any questions?
This line's going to be available on the website.
Yes.
Download these.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to get those to Lois and she'll make them available to you. Yes.
I know this is a ridiculous question, but friends or communities that have this sort of problem, I'm sure it's different than ours. A trillion gallons and all that scares that kind of me. When I live on a lake, yeah, I have to drive. What would it cost to do with the lake back there to solve it? Say the money was no object. What would it cost to solve this problem?
That's probably a better question for Steve or Janice. From a treatment standpoint, we did look at treating the water supply with air tower strippers and then sending the water to all you folks for drinking. There's a little bit of a public perception problem with that, I think. People have an issue with that. There are a couple communities in the state that do that quite successfully. City of Claire's been doing it for 20 years. They had a TCE problem. They treat it and send it to their system, and they pretty much zero detect ever since. So it's a doable thing. It is quite energy dependent because you got to use blowers and heaters. And so we looked at that from an operational standpoint with Jim and Masa, and I think to take on that legacy of an operational cost was a bit of a problem long term because they just have to pass it on to all your users. So we tried to look at something more where we can use a capital investment and less operational investment as it moves forward. It's certainly an option. So, and then on the actually treating the Plume, I'll let Steve talk about that.
Give him the mic, will you?
Treating of there was a feasibility study done early on in this to look at options to stop the Plume and control the Plume, but treating the Plume, if you look just at a cost standpoint, I think Joe mentioned 13 trillion gallons. If you could do it for 5 cents a gallon, which is somewhat a realistic cost of treatment, the cost just becomes astronomical because you have to get it to a point of treatment, take it out of the ground and treat it. And the footprint of this Plume, 6 miles long, 1.25 miles at the leading edge, and depending on where you're at, it's spread throughout 300 feet of aquifer, or some places really thin. There are areas where maybe you could catch it if it was at a concentration that wasn't safe for aquatics, like at the Cedar River. There, the Plume is only 100 feet thick, and it does vent to the Cedar River. If it was at a level that was hazardous to the biology fish population, that would be an area probably where an action would be done to control that so it wasn't degrading the natural resource. But at the whole footprint, just the logistics that you mentioned earlier about in some places the groundwater is 10 feet below ground, but in other places you have to drill through 260 feet of soil before you even come to the top of the water table. and the plume out in this neck of the woods is about 40 to 80 feet below the water table, and then continues down deeper. So it's just very complex, and the likelihood of success, given the changes in geology and the resiliency of the contaminant, there's no guarantee that come up with one thing that would effectively do it if you had a budget to do that. So the primary objective is public health safety and the environment safety, and the course that this project on is to protect any end users, any receptors from being exposed to the plume.
Not only did the DEQ, we did our feasibility study in the last year and a half. The University of Detroit Mercy did a feasibility study with some grad students, and the Michigan Tech just finished up a class this year and did a senior design. And they came up with the same type of feasibility treatment options that we did, and independently, and also the costs. The costs are just very high.
Have you compared the cost to what it's going to cost to install a new well?
Yes, we have.
Just
Yes,
to-
we did that in our feasibility study.
I'm not talking
Yeah.
not to remediate the whole 13 trillion gallons, but to keep it from expanding.
Yes, we have.
Okay, and the other question I have is how many years travel time is it from reaching the Cedar River well field?
The Cedar River well field, we have that estimate time, I think it's 3 to 5 years. But you got to remember that the Cedar River well field is very deep where the well screens are, and this will be the shallow plume that's going to be riding over the top of it.
But this is a sinking plume, so over time. it's gonna-
No, because we have like, I don't know, somebody was talking about we have a deep plume. We have really 3 different levels of plume here. We have a shallow plume, an intermediate plume, and a deep plume, and we've done groundwater modeling on all 3 of those different plumes. And the deep plume, that's out about 150 years before that plume would reach the Cedar well field. So we're not anticipating the shallow or the intermediate would be doing that.
I have a question. I'd like to know a little bit about Plume 101 here. Give us some Plume 101. So it's, the site has been abandoned, so there's no new TCE being fed into the system. It's captured and it's a finite amount, correct? So is there any chance of, since it dissipates by the air, are there sections of any of these plumes that could just simply be exposed to air to help, remediate it? And I'm sorry if that's a really stupid question, but I think other people might want to know that. And since there is no new TCE coming in, when does it stop? So, they abandoned it and it was at the site, and then it started migrating, but there's no new stuff coming in. Will it just, is the characteristics of it just that it just keeps migrating? I just want to wrap my wits around understanding the culprit here.
I'd be happy to try to explain that. It is complicated. TCE does dissolve in groundwater. We call that plume. At the site in Mancelona, the water table's 70 feet below ground surface. There still is TCE emanating from the site in Mancelona in the groundwater. What happens is the TCE and/or TCE in groundwater goes through the soil matrix, and some of it absorbs to the soil, and it continues on to migrate, and then it leaches back out of the soil. So there's an absorption factor. So it doesn't there's a few organic compounds that you can put it in A and tilt the table, and it'll go to B, and there'll be nothing at A. TCE and some of the other gasoline constituents, they persist. They don't just, if you poured a cup of water out. You have water in it, you pour it out. There's still residual, and then when new water comes in, it will adsorb out of the soil into the new water. So in Mancelona, as Joe mentioned, that's at the really front of the watershed. So there is clean water that comes under the Duracite, but it does get impacted with more stuff that desorbs out of the soil, and then it continues on its way.
So it's the motion of the groundwater that when it passes through that area, that's what's actually traveling. It's taking the TCE with it. It's not really the TCE is moving.
Correct. And to complicate the plumes that we had talked about, water will move through sand readily. That's a shallow plume that moves quickly. There are clays in between where it can't migrate between the clays, or it's very difficult. And then as you get deeper, the soils are more compact and less porous, so the plume moves at a much slower rate. Like the deeper portion that the Cedar River wellfield draws water from, that plume is actually at M88 and Shush Mountain Road. It's like there, so it's very far away from that. And at that's where Janice came up with it. It'll take probably another 150 years for it to migrate that far. So it is the air, the permeability, that how easily water flows through it, and then if there's more fines, they contaminate, absorbs to it. So when it absorbs, it can desorb, and that's what happens. Clean water comes to it, it slowly desorbs out of it.
So, but these characteristics are what make this particularly wicked to try and solve, because I hope that's helpful for folks, yeah.
There are plenty of technologies to completely remediate TCE in groundwater. If it was in a sandbox close to the surface, it's still expensive, but it's something that can be done. But then when you get the way the geology changes, and I recommend taking a look at our groundwater technical memorandums we do each year, but it shows cross sections, it shows how the plume's working its way through these different permeable units, and where we're seeing it, it's very hard for me to paint the picture that those paint in the DEQ documents that are available.
Thank you.
Thanks going everybody for so before we go with the last thing on the agenda, which is really on the minds of a lot of you by the nature of your questions, is to talk about remediation, to talk about the future, and to make a decision about what is ACUTE's role, what is the community's role going forward. And while we may not make a hard and fast decision today, we certainly want to get a sense from the community as to the need to do that. As Janice and others have mentioned, Detroit Mercy and University, Michigan Tech, thank you, have been involved in substantiating what DEQ has already determined, which is that the cost effectiveness and the practicality of doing remediation on a site as large as this is just not feasible. When we created ACUTE many years ago, that was probably the foremost question that we wanted to get the answer to. Is there a remediation solution to this? The fallback question is, if there's not a remediation solution, then what? And you can see where we went from that point forward to today. So what we've done then, obviously, is to protect public health by creating a regional municipal water system and working collaboratively with DEQ and the health department and others to get that system built and to operate and maintain it. Operation and maintenance of the system, which Jim and Bill and others will tell you, is a ongoing problematic challenge. As soon as you add infrastructure, you add costs to operate and maintain that infrastructure, and at some point you get to a tipping point where there just isn't enough money to pass those costs on to the users, particularly when you're talking about a poverty area like Mancelona, or even an area like this, that's dependent largely on tourism for its economy. So what do? Well, remediation certainly would be a wonderful option, and I think it's been pretty much told unequivocally that it's not an option that's applicable to this site. What other options are there? What are the health impacts on this? I mean, years ago, we looked at the possibility of doing a cancer cluster study. Is the cancer rate in Mancelona and the surrounding area higher as a result not only of the TCE plume, but of the Tar Lake plume? Even though EPA determined that Tar Lake is more of a aesthetic problem than certainly the TCE plume is, if you ask the residents in that area that drank that water for a long time, the smell and taste and odor of that water certainly was suspect in terms of impacting people's health. So how do we go forward? ACUTE, I think when all of us got in the car back in on May 7th of 2014, thought that by now we pretty much would have folded up our tent and gone home and said, we got $5.7 million, problem solved, we can all go back to retirement and enjoying our lives of leisure. Today, we've got $1.253 million, actually $2 million with the money that DEQ is also bringing to the table, which is a huge success story, and it buys us critical time. It buys us certainly 5 to 7 years before the Shannon Creek wells are impacted. It buys us the capacity and infrastructure so that when those wells are impacted, we can extend DEQ, can extend those, extend municipal water to those people that are impacted. The long-term future raises all kinds of questions that while we may not answer today with today's technology, we want to be very diligent about monitoring and looking for new technologies or new opportunities that may not be apparent to us today. When we started out on this process, we thought, well, maybe we could do some remediation at the well site. And not to say that that's an impossible task, but again, if you're the state of Michigan, you ask Bob and Janice and Randy and others, what's possible. They're going to tell you what's possible is largely dependent on their current budget and future budgets. The fund, and I'm going to ask Bob to get up in a minute because Bob Wagner and I have been partnered on this from day one, and he's just a vast body of knowledge on this subject. The future in terms of even extending water mains is going to be dependent on Michigan passing a new bond issue. The money that this came out of has pretty much been exhausted, or some other funding mechanism, if not a bond issue. So what does the future look like? There's lots of uncertainties. Would a cancer study, cluster study help with that? We looked at it years ago. It just wasn't a practical thing because the resources weren't available to do that. Would it be something that we could do now that would bolster our ability to be effective advocates? That's an open question. Is remediation possible? The technology may not exist today, or the application of this technology, given the magnitude of this problem and complexity, may not be possible today. 5 years from now, technology is constantly changing on a daily basis. So, in my estimation, I think the answer to the question, what does the future look like, and do we need to keep ACUTE active? Maybe we're like a computer. Again, we put it on sleep mode, but we're prepared to come back in the event that any of these things are possible. We talked about the impact on Bel Air. All these things are in our future and largely unknown. If we haven't learned anything, we've learned that a strong partnership with state and local government and community engagement is critical to this process. If it weren't for all of you, if it weren't for that community engagement process, I can pretty much assure you that we would not be talking about the $2 million project today. So all of you and your diligence and your involvement and your curiosity about these things are what's got us to this point and which will keep us going forward. And I know Dean's got a comment, and then I'd like to just leave this with Bob.
Gary, on the agenda, I'm Dean Branson, by the way, part of the ACUTE group that's been trying to keep this ball moving. One of my first questions, there's a lot of people here that have been here many times before. The last time we had an ACUTE meeting was July 11th, 2014. And the reason is it took a long time to get us to the point where we actually had sufficient funds to be able to do this short-term project. But I'd like to just see a show of hands. How many have never been to one of these meetings before to talk about and hear some information about there? So looks to me like maybe a fourth of the audience, or you've never been here before, Gary. So I think your question about Now, on the agenda was promised that we would talk a little bit about, and we've already spent quite a bit of time talking about remediation. Our question now that we'd like to put before the groups, and everything else you've had up till now, and everything that's going to follow this, is informational. What we'd like to do for a few minutes is to raise a little bit more of a discussion about this remediation question. And when you've heard people say, oh, it's been studied at Michigan Tech, it's been studied at Mercy, and DEQ's had an evaluation of this, and mostly what they're talking about is, can we do anything about this 13 trillion gallons of water? The question that was raised the last time ACUTE met was not the 13 trillion gallons of water. It was a zone in front of the Summit Village well field, which is the next well field. DEQ was telling us then, and is still telling us, about 7 years from now, that well field will encounter this plume. It's not one of these that's going to, like, the screens are deeper and it's going to float over the top. These wells will encounter this plume. So what was discussed, again, a year ago by a couple of people, a couple of engineers downstate. One of them was Joel Parker, wanted to be here today. The other was Mike Davis, and we asked them to talk about the technology. And there are a couple of technologies. One specifically is chemical oxidation. And what they talked about specifically was an area, it's like, think in terms of a three-dimensional box that would be put around the plume, and you could inject chemicals on one side and pull them across with another horizontal drilling operation to the other side and actually chemically oxidize the trichloroethylene in that plume. And this is the potential of this forestalling the need that rather than 7 years that it's going to encounter the Summit Village, it may be 17 years or some other number depending on how fast the plume is moving and how effective this technology is. So the question we just like to spend a few minutes talking about, and I think there's two big questions on whether or not that technology is feasible. Is the water potable, drinkable? Does it taste good? Is it safe to drink after the trichloroethylene has been chemically oxidized? Now, there's a lot of people who are saying, yes, it will be, maybe it will be. Well, we need data on this, and it means another study, a bench scale study. And can they actually push chemicals from one side of that plume to the other side and chemically oxidize everything? That means a pilot study. None of this is cheap. We're talking now, again, on a project almost the size of what we're talking about today. It could be another couple of $1 million to do that. And so, well, where's that money going to come from? But the main thing is it economically feasible to do this? And I think you were raising the question earlier, is what's the trade-off? If you say, okay, it's not feasible, it's going to cost you another $4 million to put all this fixed in place compared to a $2 million investment to forestall the investment of the $4 million, does that make economic sense? Well, we don't want to discuss that point today because we don't have the engineering data. So the question is, do we, the community, the people that are here in the room today, do you want us to take this to the next level and work with Janice Adams, who's been working with Michigan Tech, working with she knows Mike Davis, she knows Joel Parker, they work with these people. They could come back with a more detailed presentation, pros and cons, and have a detailed discussion. We were thinking maybe sometime even later this fall, October, November timeframe. But that isn't free either. None of this is free at this point. It costs money. So how much interest? Now, I know everybody in the room would say, sure, it's free, let's go get more data. Well, it's not free. So it costs money. So how much interest? What are the pros and cons? What are your thoughts? Let's take a couple of minutes and try to get some people to sort of speak up, show of hands, your thoughts about should we just sort of abandon the idea of remediation right now, or should we go at it one more time and have another evaluation involving all the community?
Well, I'm a property owner, and I was involved in Shane Creek and all that, and I know the impact on all of it. But the impact, we that are owners of 150 miles worth of lake frontage in this county, we are concerned about the impact of the value of all that property, which amounts to somewhere near $5 million. Now, somebody isn't interested in that. I'm very surprised. They're not too sure they're going to be affected by the plume, but they know that the psychological impact on the property values are going to be immense. So I just want to say that type of people I'm in favor of looking for.
Hopefully the question that was answered earlier about will it affect the lake and the streams. My role in being here is partly as an environmental guy, and we have spent a lot of time analyzing the Cedar River and see whether or not it's had effect, not just at the water quality criteria level, but are the organisms being affected by this? So I think there is some subtle measurements of that. And the things that was mentioned earlier is, is it dissipating? And is clearly the properties are, it's dissipating. It goes to the air.
You said that we could, it's just a study.
Just a study.
Psychologically, to the guy that's buying the next $1 million home on one of these lakes out here, wants to have more than this. He'd like to have some real facts.
He's making an interesting question about public policy making. I think is great, and it has to do with, I mean, Gary has mentioned, what is this ACUTE organization? It's meant to be a community stakeholder organization. So there's representative in the room right now. There's people from the local units of government, from DEQ, from the local businesses that have a major stake in this. I think that, and they're the ones that we're asking right now, do you want to take this to the next level, or should we just accept DEQ's determination? Okay, we've ruled it out. Any kind of remediation doesn't look to be viable, feasible. Let's not go to the next level to try to do the evaluation.
To me, I understand that money is obviously important, but to me, it's more of a quality of life issue and the area that we're in. And although I understand that the need to have a short-term solution in finding drinking water, if you're not looking for a long-term solution to fix the problem, then it's just an ongoing issue that never ends. And I think as we continue to raise awareness and work together to find ways to bring in funds from other areas or get it on federal radar as a Superfund site again, or look beyond just us at all the lives that are being impacted.
I think her question about money is a big one, and I think when I Steve's point earlier, the way the trichloethylene moves through the sand and the soil and the clay in the area, it will probably be here for our great-grandchildren's grandchildren. I mean, we could spend $1 trillion and it'll still be here. I mean, this is not going away. So we can turn it over to EPA, it'll still be here. So that's one of the reasons why when DEQ is a little pessimistic about, it's not just that there's a technology that the light bulbs haven't turned on about. Even if the light bulbs were here, we're not sure that it'll still be here. The problem is not going to go away. Bill, you have a question. This is the president of the Mancelona Area Water Sewer Authority.
Actually, it's less of a question, more of a statement, or more of my opinion.
Yes.
I believe that we should keep our eyes open for new technologies for remediation. Absolutely, of course. I believe that so much that in the past, if it is practical to do so, I've offered up a piece of my property for a pilot study, if that's where a good place a pilot study would be. But as far as the expenditure of money goes, there is a finite and doable solution. The long-term plan that MAZA has been working towards is a build out of the system which would cover all of the real estate and all of the properties that will be potentially affected by the plume. The plume would hopefully reach the shores of Lake Bel Air and then harmlessly vent to the atmosphere without causing damage to the wildlife. But when we're talking about spending money, and funds are limited and it's hard to come by new money, there is a conceivable goal of building the system out basically to the shores of Lake Bel Air along as the plume moves. And once that's done, everybody in the affected area has safe drinking water, and that's a sure and safe bet. That's something that's achievable. That's something we know that can be done. So I would like to, my personal opinion, if I was in charge of the budgeting, I would build the system, #1 priority, to its conclusion and logical end, while keeping my eyes open for new technologies for remediation. But right now with the technologies, and I try to keep on top of this, that are available to us, remediation is just incredibly costly, because we're talking about trillions of gallons of water. But providing safe drinking water, that is doable for everyone involved in the affected area.
Bill, how would you feel about portion of the plume that's got the biggest economic impact on our local economy, doing pilots and testing and bench scale?
Absolutely, we should do that. But we shouldn't do that to such a degree monetarily that we take away from building of the system.
If we were to do what Bill said and build that system out to its completion, would there then be a way to push the contamination through the plume and get it to the lake faster than it's flowing naturally?
I think the geology, maybe we could ask one of the geologists here, but I think when it was mentioned about it's moving with the water, the water is the powerful force. And I don't think you can steer it, direct it, pump it, pull it. I mean, I think it's doing what it's going to do. But thank you for the comment.
Before you do any remediation, there has to be somebody assess what's the risk of not doing it. We're just talking about doing it without a specific purpose, knowing that we've cleaned up the drinking water. So what's the risk?
The risk of not remediating?
Not remediating.
Now, maybe, Janice, I think that's a great place for, because I know as part of your evaluation, there was a risk analysis. Do you want to field that question about the risk of not remediating? Or, and I promised Bob that we'd give him a chance, and so is Gary. Let me, by way of introduction, we've been working with Bob Wagner for at least 10 or 12 years. And with the community engagement, Bob's been a champion of community engagement, the community engagement process. And you're seeing the results of some of it right now. So with that, Bob is the guy that essentially made the deal, the matching fund deal, which really changed public policy on how to fix these kind of problems. So Bob, help us with your answer to the question about the risk of not doing evaluating.
Thanks, Dean. Well, first of all, you all had some really great questions, which is one of the reasons why working with ACUTE for some 15 years now has been important to the department, because it does provide a forum and an opportunity for engagement of the department and citizens and MASA and various local units of government in Antrim County. So it's been really important to us. So the question of risk is something that we look at every day. I look at every day. For those of you that don't know me, I started out in 1985 as an investigator of environmental contamination in northern Michigan, working out of Roscommon, Gaylord, Cadillac, and I don't live too far from here. I was basically the person who called Gary Knapp up one day and said, we have to address the drinking water risk that TCE poses, and I believe the state can give an organization some money to do that. And then Gary and others moved towards the creation of the Water Authority, MASWA, to make that happen so that we could fund that. So when we look at environmental contamination, we look at what is the risk to human health and what is the risk to ecological systems, including lakes and streams. And we use toxicology and exposure assumptions, whether you're a bug living on the bottom of Lake Bel Air or whether you're a person who lives in Shush Mountain, Shaney Creek and is drinking water. And we look to the body of research done by others, not by our department. All of this research is done by other entities, universities, foundations, etc., that give us toxicology numbers, in this case about trichloroethylene or TCE. The body of research that's been done to date says that if you drink trichloroethylene in your drinking water at a residence, so it's very specific, 5 parts per billion or more is too much. So the cleanup standard, the criteria is 5 parts per billion. Likewise, with respect to protecting surface waters, rivers and lakes and streams, the body of toxicology nationwide is that 88 parts per billion or greater represents a risk. If it's below 88, environmental critters things that live in lakes and streams, etc., are not at risk. And then the direct contact number, for instance, if you go down to the lake and you want to swim and you have your grandkids with you or your children with you, the direct contact, meaning water containing TCE touching your skin, is even much higher. I think it's around 200. Again, it's based upon research done on TCE by researchers throughout the U.S. and over the last 30 years. And know that right now the department, my division, Remediation Redevelopment Division, is engaged in a comprehensive review of all of our cleanup criteria, risk-based numbers. So we're going through all 310. We're looking at every pathway, direct contact, ingestion, inhalation, and we're looking at the toxicology, the physical and chemical properties of every single substance to see if that number should change. And we do that review every so often to make sure we're current, that the numbers are reliable. So 5 for human health, drinking water pathway, 88 for surface water, and we don't have anything that is going to enter surface water here that's going to be above 88 based upon our test results from monitor wells. And we don't have anything above 200 with respect to water containing TCE entering Lake Bel Air or any other surface water. So we look at those risks, and when we have risks that are present, then we try to address them. And there's a couple ways to address them, right? We can clean it up, get rid of it, destroy it, degrade it, remove it, or we can also what we call mitigate it. In this case, our choices were provide safe drinking water to people that have wells that have TCE or are at risk of having TCE, including bottled water as quickly as possible, or clean it up. 2 choices. And we have that same choice for every site of environmental contamination in Michigan. So when we look at that, we look at what's reliable, what's going to be long-term affordable, so what's the cost? So reliability, affordability are important parts of the equation that I have to look at, because I'm the chief of Remediation Redevelopment Division, so folks like Janice and Randy and with the assistance of AMEC, they come and say, here's what we think needs to be done to address risk at this site. And we are addressing about 400 sites in Michigan using public funds every day to address risk. In this specific case, we are dealing with a lot of water that contains very low levels of TCE. Unfortunately, TCE is pretty toxic to humans, especially when you drink it. 5 parts per billion is a very low number.
What about the inhalation?
Inhalation is would be a concern if basically we thought TCE would be entering buildings and homes, but in this case, because of clean water over the top or depth, we don't believe that's an issue. But we do look at inhalation as well. So in this case, we have to date spent about 18 million, soon to be 19 million, to provide safe drinking water. When we looked at addressing 13 trillion gallons of groundwater, and I'll admit, that's all of it, we think, plus or minus a trillion, okay? Seriously. At 5 cents a gallon, which you heard referred to earlier, nickel a gallon. Okay, it takes energy to move the water, whether you're going to move it up or if you're going to pump something in, it takes energy. So we're looking at electricity in almost all cases.
Let's get to this issue. You told us earlier what the threshold levels are.
Right.
What is the risk of this plume reaching those threshold levels over time?
We expect it will stay above 5 parts per billion and be a drinking water threat. We do not expect it to be a risk to any surface water or direct contact or inhalation risk.
Okay, so we've addressed
Yeah.
we're going after the drinking water part.
Right.
And we're gonna get that. So that's done, then the risk of those other things is very, very low. That's what you said. Except-
I hear what you're saying, and I want to finish the cost, because we talked about reliability of managing the risk.
We know the cost is high. The question is, are you gonna reach those threshold levels that would address cost?
The threshold level that we're looking at that is the risk is drinking water. That's the threshold, that's the driver. That's what causes us to react. And as I said, there's the choice of cleanup or providing safe drinking water. And let me make it clear, we clean up TCE every minute in the state of Michigan. The technology is there. I'm not saying that it can't be done. We do it all the time. It's really about the cost. So if you take 13 trillion gallons of groundwater at a nickel a gallon, which is really a reasonable cost, it's like $6.5 billion. Now let me put that in perspective. With the Environmental Protection Bond Act, which provided money for cleanup in 1988, plus the Clean Michigan Initiative Bond, 1998, which also provided funding for doing cleanups like this, which the $20 million for water supply here has come from. We spent about $700 million to date, not even $1 billion. So we spent about $700 million cleaning up 1,900 sites in Michigan. And we view that as really costly. But the idea of spending $1 billion, or in this case, $6 billion on 13 trillion gallons of groundwater, where we have addressed the risk by extending public water, is hard for me as one of the keepers of the state's funds, and using that money prudently is hard to, so it's really about cost. I love Bill's comments about let's keep our eye on this, because technology does change and costs can change. And I agree, we should keep our eye on it. And if some technology comes along that lowers that cost per gallon, that would cause us to make a different decision, that's a good thing. It's not in play right now. But that may happen down the road, and we may need to consider doing cleanup work. The last thing I want to say is, I understand thinking, well, let's address this area, protect this area. We've done that before too. Again, I think that's something we should keep our eye on. But again, it's about cost. It's not about the cost of the system. It's not about the cost of the technology. It's about how long you're going to have to run it, and what does that cost a year? Because it's not about the upfront, put it in the ground, build the buildings. It's about paying the bills every month for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. To give you an idea, 1985, I investigated a TCE release, a TCE release in Vanderbilt, Michigan. Worked with the local company there. They put in a treatment system. This is a groundwater purge wells. They've been pumping 300,000 gallons a day now for 25 years. And we had thought they would be done by now. They're not. They're not done. They still have a long ways to go. So pump and treat is slow. If you think about it, we're talking 5 parts per billion. What is 5 parts per billion? Well, it's 5 gallons of TCE in 500,000 10,000 gallon swimming pools. Right? It's a billion, right? 5 parts per billion. So you need 1 billion gallons of water for every part you're going to remove. So it takes lots of energy to move that much water. And because it's spread out all over, you have to move it all through the filters, all through the treatment. So it's really about cost and affordability. It's not about risk, because we can address the risk by extending drinking water.
And we believe that having safe drinking water at your residence is the critical piece with respect to your property values. It's not the fact that you live 200 feet, 80 feet, or 30 feet from water that may be contaminated. It's about, do you have safe water when you turn on the faucet with respect to property.
So what I hear you tell us is that we're doing the right thing with this system of bringing water, good water, and ensuring that we have good drinking water over time. This is a really good project, and that we just should monitor, and that somebody like your organization or with others that constantly doing the assessment of the movement of this of the TCE.
Well, I'm trying to give you the context of how we think about it. And obviously, you have great questions. You've been thinking about it. And it is about choices, but we do have to manage risk. And we have to do it reliably. And it has to be affordable for all of us. And that's what we look at. And that's what I'm saying. I'll take questions.
You hit on one of the main things. There's a lot of people with a lot of real estate values here, especially Shannon, folks and stuff with a lot of money in this place. Is it my understanding that you guys have a plan to make sure everybody's covered for all these real estate values, whether it's property owners now that are selling condominiums? The water's going to be brought in, and everybody's going to be covered. We're going to have fresh water, and what is the timeline?
So the question is do we have a plan to basically make sure everybody's risk is managed, it's safe, and their property values are maintained? I'll assume that is that they have safe water. Safe water, period. Yes, we do have a plan, and that is to monitor the movement of the TCE contamination groundwater, to work with Northwest Community Health to make sure that they have adequate funding to go out and collect water samples from residential wells or other wells. Also work with MASFA in terms of monitoring the Sentinel wells outside of the Cedar River wells to make sure that we know if those wells are going to be affected. We believe they won't be by the higher level contamination, but as you've heard, the deeper level, eventually we'll get there. And we expect we'll still be here checking on that and monitoring movement. Last, if we detect TCE contamination, or should I say our partners at the health department detect it, we'll work with them and the homeowner to get them bottled water, and we will work to get them hooked up to municipal water as soon as possible. As you've heard from MASA and their engineer, they're working diligently with us to put in place system improvements that provides for better pressure, better reliability, the opportunity that if Cedar River well fields were to be affected, that they could turn the switch and still give you all water out of the Mancelona system. So we have a lot of pieces going, but our plan is to continue to make sure that people do not have or drink TCE contaminated water at their residence or business into the future for as long as funding is available.
Can you guarantee that that's going to happen to the guy that water skiing out there and his I think I got it first straight in my mind, that 5% is going to affect him anyway. And the TCP is going to sink. So if I'm selling you a $1 million home, that's really not a problem, is it?
It is not a problem for everyday citizens using the resort, recreating here, living at their home, watering their lawn, having their grandkids run through the sprinkler with municipal water. Jumping in the lake. Safe as well. And as I said, that is based upon the body of data that the department looks to, that is all independent researchers, whether it's this university or that science foundation or this foundation, about what we know about TCE. Is there absolute no risk? I can't give you that. I can only tell you that we use all of the latest data and information to determine what is a safe number, and we apply a level of conservatism to it as well. And we're currently reviewing all of those numbers again this year to make sure we got it right. And if we change, and we'll adjust. So if it goes to 1 part per billion, guess what? We're going to expand the plumbing system and provide more municipal water.
The reality of it is, though, it's already affecting real estate value now. Just for instance, my mother owns 2 condos, and they just heard about it from another Traverse City agent. They didn't know what most of us know around here, and it got canceled.
So the question is, I just want to repeat it, is that the presence of TCE and groundwater here is still affecting property values. And I understand that it is affecting people's perception of that there may be a risk or that place is contaminated, right? And I understand that. And I think you all understand better the risk and how it's being addressed. There are very few places in Michigan, and this may come as a surprise, but there are very few places in Michigan where a trained environmental investigator can go and find something pristine. True fact. For instance, every lake, every river, every surface water body has mercury in it that exceeds the levels that Michigan would desire. And the reason is atmospheric mercury deposition that we can't control. So it's, we have, I don't know how to tell your friends other than to say, this is managed, this is handled, it's safe, and here are the reasons why. Because it's simply a perception, but the reality is that we are providing clean, safe drinking water to everyone, in the area and anyone in the future that will need it. And that is really, what fixes the risk. Doesn't change the fact that it's contaminated groundwater. But there's a lot of contaminated groundwater in Michigan, I will tell you that. We have a long legacy of industry, and it's everywhere. I go up to Houghton Hancock, Torch Lake, long history of mining. And there is a lot of leftovers. And we have much to do up there in the UP, pristine end of the West End, right? But we have much environmental contamination to address in the future. Likewise, the city of Detroit. I grew up there. Every residential lot has lead. Why? Because when I was a kid, we diligently scraped that paint off our house and we applied lead paint. And we did it every couple of years because that's what everybody did with their houses. So there's lead paint flecks and chips and dust, because I remember using that wire brush, on every single residential lot in Detroit. But does that mean we can't reuse that? Doesn't mean we can't mitigate. We can mitigate it. We're not going to remove it all. But we can mitigate it and make those properties safe for use.
I just would comment as a Summit Village property owner that what is causing the perception problem, the property owner concern and so on, is a missing link here. We have MASA, we have people saying we can provide you with safe drinking water. And on the other hand, we just went through this process of getting $250,000 from the county because we heard that the DEQ could not provide us any more funds. So the link is, where are the funds coming to assure us that we will get safe drinking water, that will be connected to the public water system? And will those funds be there, and who provides them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the answer to that question is all of us. It really is, because 1988, on the ballot proposal for you to vote on was the Environmental Protection Bond. Should the state borrow X amount of dollars using its ability to issue bonds, to do environmental cleanup? And the citizens voted yes. And as a result, $338 million was provided for the Department of Environmental Quality, DNR at that time, do environmental cleanup work. And we did. 1988, Clean Michigan Initiative Bond provided another $400 million towards environmental cleanup, as well as a number of other things. Improved state parks was on there, waterfront redevelopment, loans, and some other things. But $400 million just for environmental cleanup. What did the citizens do? Yes. So, my job, people that work for me, is to use the money we have prudently, wisely. It's all up to you as to whether, future funding is available to continue this work. Whether it's through a ballot proposal or whether it's working through, your state legislature. I think you all know the difficulty we've had with, for instance, roads. And these are tough choices. They are tough choices. So, our future will be determined by whether we can find the money, approve the money to continue the work. At some point, to be honest, we've cleaned up 1,900 sites with $700 million. We think we've done a great job. It's just that there's more to do. So.
I understand your analogy that there's impact no matter where you go in Michigan, but just a quick Google search about this TCE plume, it claims it's the largest TCE plume in the U.S. So, that's a little bit different to having something that's naturally occurring from air, or fallout, whatever. But this area is particularly dependent on the tourism industry, and it's going to have a very real economic impact. So I guess to Gary and Pete's question, I don't think we can afford not to look into remediation, because it is a stigma, and it's going to have very real effects on this area in particular.
Yeah, fair comment.
If the water's safe, then it becomes a marketing issue. We need to do, the county, the realtors, that everybody needs to do marketing to let everybody know that it is safe.
I just wanted to say, as your city representative, I'll be making sure that those dollars are available at the state level to continue funding the expansion to provide safe drinking water.
Question in the back?
Is the Dura spot still an extremely hot spot, or is it? And if you talked about that well that pumps 1 million gallons, whatever, if that had occurred, would we have cut your 13 trillion gallon problem in half if we had been pumping?
Yeah, it's a great question. Dura site, that's where TCE was released. For those of you that maybe don't know this, the releases there occurred prior to 1968. There was never TCE used there after 1968. So this is a legacy release, but TCE is a man-made solvent that is very resistant to breakdown. So it likes to stick around. We did investigation at the Dura property. We actually drilled holes through the floor in the middle of the night, working with Dura, who allowed us to go in and actually put a small drill rig up and drill right through the floor of the plant. Because of the expansion of that plant over time, the areas where it was released were basically covered up with concrete and roof. What we found is levels of TCE, but not levels that were worth basically chasing. And in fact, I think last time I talked with Janice, she can confirm, last I thought was that groundwater actually leaving the site no longer contained TCE. We were starting to see the very tail end, and most of it is now west of 131 and all the way out to, this area. Yeah, that's the Dura site, former Gulf and Western, former Wicks, former Mount Clemens Metal Products.
Can you touch on the questions that came up about federal money and Superfund?
Sure. So federal money comes basically through the Superfund program, which is also sometimes known as the National Priorities List. And the federal government has a fair amount of money to address Superfund sites across the nation. In Michigan, we have 65 Superfund sites that we work with EPA on. With federal money comes some federal requirements. For instance, in Michigan, when we talk about environmental contamination, we use a standard of causation. Who caused it? They're responsible. So if you caused it, you're responsible, you do the cleanup. Federal law says if you're an owner of property where it was released, you're responsible. So at the time when we started looking into this, which was in 1999, and we were in conversation with Dura was willing to do a lot of work, which they did. They put in the first monitor wells west of 131. They were the first party to start addressing residential wells that were contaminated. They were not responsible under state law. They didn't cause it. A company by the name of Mount Clemens Metal Products, who operated from 1948 to 1968, was the party who caused it. Had we asked for US EPA to come in to address this matter, they would have held Dura responsible as the owner and operator of the property where the release occurred by federal law. The federal law says. It's not EPA law, it's federal law. EPA just administers it. In Michigan, we didn't want to see a Michigan-based company, Troy, Michigan, become responsible for something they did not cause, especially since they were voluntarily assessing and assisting us. So that was the decision at that time. We didn't want to see US EPA engaging with Dura, not knowing how that was going to go, and Michigan law says they're not responsible. That's difficult for us to do that, and we don't. So that was kind of what happened there. So they didn't bring in the federal resources, but
But now that Dura's not there, is there any way to get federal help?
sure, we could try to refer it to US EPA. It is their call as to whether it would become a national priorities list site.
How does it happen?
Well, it's risk-based. And since we've mitigated the risks by providing drinking water, they're not going to see much risk.
But if there was a cancer study done and looking at, and maybe it's a generation that consumed all that water all the time before there was the risk, but there are risks.
That part I don't know about, and that's something that we could work with Department of Health and Human Services with respect to any cancer risk study, and then whether that would lead to in that direction. That's not something that our department does, but that would be the path.
Antrim County now owns that property. It's
Okay,
now
Antrim County now owns the,
Yes.
okay. Yes.
I'm somewhat confused, which is difficult lately, but the last comment that you made was the indication that the last part of the TCE was leaving the site and was mitigating towards the west. Yet earlier, I thought I understood that the TCE had sought residence in the soil, and that it was the water that was still moving the pollutants towards that plume. Why am I getting apples and oranges mixed up, or what?
No, that's a fair observation. So we'll start back at the beginning. TCE released into soil. Our guess is enough TCE was released at the property that TCE actually made it to the water table, but it's all sand. So TCE, as it goes down, it coats every single little sand particle, billions of them, trillions of them. And then rainwater flows on top of that, and the sand with the TCE on it is kind of like a sponge. It just kind of keeps leaking over decades. So now TCE has reached the water table, it's mixing with groundwater. Groundwater's always been moving, nothing's new there. It's been moving from the east to the northwest in Mancelona forever because of geology, which hasn't changed. So it just says, TCE, here we go, we're going for a ride, and this is where we're going. And meanwhile, the soil keeps leaching. Every time there's a rain event, a little more TCE gets released, and that continues for decades. Where we're at now is we don't see much TCE left at the site, not compared to in the past, and we think we're very close to the point where the amount of TCE contributed to groundwater right at the former Dura property is negligible. It isn't worth trying to clean up. Most of it now, most of the mass is west of 131 and actually out probably towards Shish Mountain Drive and M88. That's where it's located. But it's had, what, 68, 50 years to move. So it's been out there for a long time. The difficult part, and why this is probably one of the biggest, we do see at other locations where TCE has been released into the environment, degradation. And we see degradation because of the geology, because of microorganisms that are present, and other things that are in soil or groundwater. What we had here is a very clean sand. So clean that not much lives in it, microorganisms. And we have groundwater that doesn't have much oxygen in it and very little mineral content. So it's very clean. So TCE doesn't have any, shall we say, outside factors to cause it to break down, and it just continues to persist. And we know that because we know what we call daughter compounds. So when a compound starts degrading, it changes into 2 or 3 other things. And we know in this case, we don't see any of those other compounds, any of those daughter compounds. What we see is TCE or no TCE. It's just that clean, that clear.
Is there any daughter compounds developed when the plume or the actual TCE chemical is released into, let's say, a river or a lake, changing the molecular structure of the H2O cell? Is it just passed? It passes through it. As soon as it gets enough oxygen, it dissipates, right?
If TCE is allowed to just reach surface water is actually a pretty aggressive environment with TCE because 1, it's high in dissolved oxygen. 2, it's agitated by the wind. And 3, there are microbes living in surface water that will eat carbon-based chemicals like TCE. TCE is a carbon-based compound. So surface water is not a bad place to have it vent as long as it's safe for critters and humans, and that's why we talked about those numbers. There are things that can change TCE into other substances, one of which is vinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride is something that's even more toxic than TCE, and we have seen that at some sites, like up in Charlevoix, at a place on Lake Charlevoix, that the state's doing cleanup work at. And it's because that TCE goes through a peat layer. And the peat acts as basically a natural degradation layer. So it breaks apart the TCE that results in vinyl chloride, and then we have to now address the vinyl chloride as a result of that peat layer. So that can happen. Yeah. Renetta.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Renetta Tomasi with Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. And just 2 quick things. One, we're here for the long haul. We've been involved in this for a long time, and we're here. And so if there is remediation looked at and grant opportunities, we can lend our skills to help reach out and write grants and partner with folks to get things done, and we're happy to do that. The second thing, though, is I also wanted to say that we brought a representative from Michigan Oil and Gas Association, Jim Peters, to the ACUTE table specifically for the idea of remediation. And Jim couldn't make it today, but he said that he wanted, if the community was interested in remediation, he wants to throw his name in the hat because of their skills with horizontal drilling. That's what they're thinking might be brought to this particular site that might be helpful. So he's still willing to look at that, and if the community is interested in doing that, we are also really supportive of that, and Jim is as well.
Yes.
You know, I know we've asked this question, and I know I semi-answered. I'm going to ask it one more time, but I'm still wondering, if this stuff dissipates when it hits the air, and you keep talking about 13 trillion gallons, we aren't enough people to need 13 trillion gallons of water. I don't understand. Okay, we got different levels. I get that. Sometimes it's 10 miles, sometimes it's 250. Okay, I get that. Why is it not feasible to take only what we need for drinking or for whatever, for life in this area, which can't be that many gallons of water, at the 10 mile or the 10-foot level, just bring it up to the air in a reservoir or whatever, let it dissipate, and then take it and pump it for, I don't see why that's not, why is that so much money?
So engineering-wise, what you're asking is feasible. That is feasible, but it does cost money. And so, I don't know what that's going to cost. So, one, you'd have to decide what's the scope, how big, how much water are we going to remove and how deep? How are we going to do it? And then what that's going to cost. And we're open to that. I'm not saying no. Okay? So, we just have to look at the numbers. But the numbers are, you know, it's like, is this a 1,200 square foot house or is this a 13,000 square foot house? It's still a house, right? It's still water, but how big? And then, of course, what's that going to cost to put on the ground? And then how long are you going to operate it? And what is the operating cost? And we would be happy to look at that in any area.
Well, I'd like to address that with one aspect. It seems so simple to throw it up in the air and let it dissipate. Dissipate means it goes out there. TCE doesn't go away when it goes in the air, okay? Would you want to live downwind of where they're throwing this up in the air? Okay? There's the problem. And what Bob has been, when he addresses this thing of remediation and putting it onto the ground and so forth, the one thing that's not been said here is, where it's being done in Clare and these other places, they just don't throw it up in the air. They throw it into a big box, a building, where it is then put into the air, then goes through carbon filters, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and those carbon filters have to be changed periodically, whatever it is, and those have to go to an EPA licensed dump site. This is where all the cost gets involved, okay? So that you know,
Thank you.
that was never brought up, that when it goes in the air, it just doesn't go away.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, David.
I get it.
If I could say one other thing, the gentleman in the white shirt here, and I apologize, I don't know you, he brings up a point that, very frankly, I think is extremely important for all of us. Home values. What does it mean, and where do we go from here? I'm not going to get into all my background, but I happen to handle a number of calls from people that are prospective buyers up here. They've maybe even made an offer on a place with contingency that have to be addressed. The first thing they do is they get on the internet and they look up Antrim County TCE, and it is doom and gloom. If you've ever done that, I'm telling you, it's not good. One point of this meeting today that I was hoping will get across is that this funding approved by the county commissioners, okay, with the matching from the DEQ, etc., is putting in place phase one of what Joe Elliott talked about as a long-term plan. That long-term plan is the answer to our real estate values here. Okay? That's what we need to get across. We have a long-term plan approved by an engineering company, approved by the DEQ, and it is there and it is being augmented, it is being done. That is what's going to help our real estate values.
So how do we load up the internet with all those?
I'm going to do that. I'll be very frank with you. okay? And sometimes I'm too frank, he'll tell you that. I had a meeting with the gentleman who owns our local newspaper. I wrote him a 2-page letter with his article on the meeting where the commissioners voted to approve this funding. The article is written in such a negative way that anybody going into the internet, reading that article, you would think that catastrophes still happen. Yet this was the most positive thing, even though there were concerns and legitimate concerns about this funding. This article was written in such a negative way that anybody that read it would not ever get the positive out of it. And what we've got to do from now on is to make sure that we are talking about the positive. That's what we need to push, because it is positive. We have a long-term plan. And that's what we have to get across. The owner of that magazine was sitting over here just a minute ago. He and I had this discussion. He knows I feel about it. And surprisingly, he was pretty much in agreement. So we have got to look at this and bring across positive thoughts, positive ideas, talk to people positively about it, because we truly have a positive long-term plan.
How do you get that changed on Google?
I'm sorry to hear that.
How do you get that changed on Google so when people do it, they see
That's an excellent, I don't know, that's an excellent question though.
There's a way
Excellent
to do
question.
it. There's a way to do it. You basically pay Google to get your articles to show up in the first top 5 hits.
One of the things that has not been brought up here either, this meeting today is only the beginning for the 3 of us that are kind of pushing with ACUTE. We want meetings with the realtors. Jim Richardson's sitting here. I've already talked to him about this. We want to meet with as many realtors as we can to talk to them about what was said today and what the future brings, because they have got to know that. They've got to be able to tell that to their prospective clients. We want to meet with the townships. We want to meet with the cities. Maybe we'll have another meeting like this. We want to get the word out. That's the positive that can happen. And we're doing what we can.
That's a great message, Steve, because I will tell you that anyone who calls me or calls Janice or Randy is going to say, is it safe out there? Heard about this TCE contamination safe? We're going to say, yeah, it's safe, it's fine. You're not at risk. Proceed as you would on any other real estate you're interested in. There is no risk. It's all managed. That's our message. Scott?
No,
Health Department?
Message.
You put it on a video tape, put it on the internet.
Absolutely.
See, now that's what will work.
Marketing.
Well, but all of you touch people too.
We are. We're taping this right now.
Yeah.
We are.
We're taping it right now, live, so turn around and say hi, everybody.
I have a question over here.
Does it or does it not dissipate when it becomes airborne?
It likes to be a gas. TCE likes to be a gas. The problem in the groundwater and all that soil on top, and know that rainwater keeps coming down through the soil every time it rains to the water table. It has limited ability to basically become a gas.
So it does not need to be processed as that gentleman just described?
Oh no, if we're gonna, for instance, remove it from the ground or treat it in place, one technique is to use air. So we bring it up to the surface, we run it through what's called an air stripper. It's designed to cause it to turn into a gas, and we turn it into a gas. Or we can put wells in the ground and inject air to try to get it to become a gas. Now this one is so big that would take a lot of wells. So we do that typically in small places like a dry cleaner.
But that's their inhalation problem.
Well, it has to be captured. And then the question that was brought up is now treatment. So now, concentration-wise, as a gas, do we have to put it through, for instance, granulated carbon, which it likes to grab onto. So think about crushing your charcoal briquettes up, and that it will absorb to that, and then we have to take care of that. So in Vanderbilt, where they pump 1.3 million a day, they've been doing it for 25 years. They have 2 20,000-pound canisters. They're like 20 feet in diameter and 25 feet high, full of carbon, to remove TCE from the waters.
So it is still a danger then if not processed?
You still have to potentially manage it, even if you convert it into a gas, yes.
It hits Lake Bel Air, dissipates into the air. Is that a problem?
We don't anticipate that to be a problem at all, no risk. Concentrations are too low. They're 5-10 parts per billion. If they were 500 parts per billion, 1,000 parts per billion, now we'd be looking at potential risk. We don't have that here.
So I think the confusion is that it's an apple and an orange. The apple is you do have to deal with it as a gas, contain it, whatever. If you're going to drink, if it's a drinking system, you have to deal with what you're doing there. But when you're talking about aerification into Lake Bel Air, you've got aerification. You've also got dilution. So you're treating it two different ways. And the combination of dilution, aeration, and the very minimal amount of contact that you would have by using a lake makes it not a problem.
Great point. Yes.
My name is Janet Koch, I'm Associate Planner for Antrim County, and there's a couple of commissioners sitting here also. And I'm hearing a lot about we need to market this, we need to tell people the water is safe. Our county website, we get a lot of hits, our homepage, we've got a just event thing. If we can get a letter from somebody saying that this drinking water is safe, I'm sure we can get permission from the board to put that front and center and get it out there. I don't know what else we can really do at the county level, but if someone's willing to write us that letter, we can put that up front and center for people to see.
That's great.
Great. All right.
It's not that safe.
I think we can do that.
You will be provided with safe drinking water. You do not need to be
Well,
concerned.
but the county can't tell you that.
No.
We don't have the expertise.
But there's a
we
claim.
can get that from somewhere.
Well, the release of articles of resolution.
You can do that.
Okay, by wrap up, I want to thank Bob and Janice and Randy and all of you. Just two quick comments. I think the summary conclusion is that it's probably a little bit premature to put ACUTE to sleep. I think that's safe to say. We'll try to be timely and efficient with when we call meetings and how often. But certainly the remediation issue is alive and well in the minds of all of you, and we'll keep it going forward as best we possibly can. My last comment, and Steve mentioned that we had planned all along, once the $250,000 was approved and this project goes forward, to do an education piece for the realtors. Steve's been on point on that from almost day one. Bob Edwards was here earlier. We got some other realtors here. We certainly want to go forward with that, and we intend to and will. And my last comment, and this is with Tristan Cole being back there, and the help from the state, if you think about all of this as not only resulting in protection of public health, but also creating infrastructure, if you go out and ask private industry, where will they put businesses? They won't even talk to you without infrastructure. They want water, they want sewer, they want fiber optics, they want rail, they want a major thoroughway, US 131. Mancelona as a poverty community is going to get a lot of focus and attention, I think, at the federal, state level, certainly at the local level, because we're going to do everything we can to take advantage of these millions of dollars that US EPA and DEQ and others have invested in that community that have resulted in infrastructure that industry terribly needs in order to consider any community for development. And all of us as taxpayers, that's critical, because not only do we have the bad part of this, which is we've got to clean up the public perception, but we have the potential good part of this, which is to increase the tax base, which puts money in the coffers of the state and local unit governments to continue this process going forward. So we're talking about partnerships, private sector, public partnerships. Private sector needs to become brought into this as well. And you talk about marketing, there's a huge need for that. So Michigan is blessed with some of the cleanest water, and I understand what Bob's saying. And if you think about it in a global context, the Great Lakes states have 1/5 of the world's supply of fresh surface water. So if you talk about a public policy issue, I can't think of anything more important that marries all these issues than protection of public health and our water, and getting private sector involved ultimately to increase our tax base. So finally, thanks to all of you. You've been patient. Your questions have been wonderful. We went way over time, but I think you're part of that, so we all share in that. Have a wonderful day and enjoy this beautiful weather. Thanks so much.